27th. The emperor had passed a bad night. The pain in the liver became more acute, extending over the whole right costal region up to the shoulder. Violent pains, dry cough, frequent nausea, bilious matters, cephalalgia, oppression, skin yellowish white. The patient refused to take rice water, prescribed a cholagogue purgative, anodyne beverage, simple fomentations, liniments, and bathing. And at 10 o'clock at night, he was rather better. 28th. The emperor continued better. The pain in the articulation had entirely subsided, but the foot was still rather swollen. 29th and 30th. Same state of health, same prescription, advised for the second time, thermal waters. 31st. The emperor well again. His strength had returned, and he went out. Fish had been brought to put in the ponds we had dug. Napoleon was desirous of throwing them into the water himself. Went into the garden. The children of the Grand Marshal perceived him and were soon round him. He had not seen them for some days, and purposing to send for them, was not sorry to find them beforehand with him. Send for the doctor, said he to General Montholon. I want his ministry. He must bore these pretty little cars, showing those of little Hortense, and opening a paper in which a pair of coral earrings were folded up. I prepared accordingly to perform the little operation, but the sight of the instrument produced the usual effect. The child cried, and the emperor, fearing lest Mamma should not be pleased, hesitated. His presence, however, and that of the earrings, soon dried up her tears. We retired under the shade of an oak tree. General Montholon supported the patient. Napoleon looked on, and little Arthur stamped and stormed, crying out that he would not allow his sister to be hurt. Napoleon was highly amused by the anger, threats, and English phrases of the little fellow, who only grumbled the more. What do you say, little rogue? Said the emperor to him. If you do not be quiet, I will have your cars bored also. Come, will you be obedient? The operation over and the earrings put on, Napoleon embraced the little amiable creature, congratulating her on her courage, and sent her away. Go and show your ears to Mamma, and if she's not satisfied and does not approve of the operation, tell her it was not I, but the Dr. Roccio who did it. Yes, sire, and she bounded away and disappeared in an instant. I remained alone with the emperor. The spirit of little Arthur had struck him, and as he walked, he made me observe the firmness of the child. The little urchin, said he. I was just as resolute at his age. Nothing could frighten or disconcert me. I was noisy and quarrelsome and feared nobody. I beat one, scratched another, and made myself formidable to all. Most of my encounters were with my brother Joseph. He was beaten, bitten, and scolded, and I had already gone to complain of him before he had time to look round him, and it was fortunate for me to be thus alert, for Mamma Letizia would have restrained my warlike humor and would not have put up with my pranks. Her affection was tempered by severity. She punished and rewarded without distinction. Nothing we did, either good or evil, was lost. My father, an enlightened man, but too fond of pleasure to trouble himself about our infancy, sometimes endeavored to excuse her faults. On those occasions, my mother would say to him, Leave that to me. It's none of your business. It's my duty to watch over them. And this she did with unexampled care, discarding and stamping with disgrace every ignoble sentiment and affection, and only allowing our young minds to imbibe impressions of what was great and elevated. She abhorred falsehood, punished disobedience, and did not allow any fault to pass unnoticed. I recollect a misadventure that happened to me, and the penalty that was inflicted upon me for my fault. There were some fig trees in one of our vineyards, and we liked to climb them, but in so doing we might fall or meet with some accident, and she therefore forbade us to approach them without her knowledge. This prohibition was a source of great disappointment to me, but still it was made, and I respected it. One day, however, being unoccupied and assailed by ennui, I took it into my head to covet the figs. They were ripe. Nobody saw me, and consequently nobody would know anything about the matter. I hastened to a tree and gathered all the fruit it bore. My appetite being satisfied, I was laying in a provision for the road by filling my pockets, when a keeper made his appearance. I was half dead and remained motionless on the branch on which he had caught me. He threatened to bind me hand and foot and carry me before my mother. Fear rendered me eloquent. I described the ennui produced by idleness, promised to respect the fixed future, and at last succeeded in appeasing him. I congratulated myself upon my narrow escape and flattered myself that this adventure would not come to light. But the traitor keeper told the whole story, and accordingly the next day the Signora Letitia felt desirous of gathering some figs and proceeded to the tree for that purpose, but there were none left. I had carried all away. The keeper was sent for, an explanation ensued, and disclosure was made, and the guilty paid the penalty of his fault. The emperor had resumed his habits of early rising and would frequently go and breathe the fresh air before sunrise. One day, his gums being painful, he entered my room and addressing himself to me before I had perceived him. "I suffer, doctor," said he. "My teeth ache. What is to be done?" "Let us see. What says your work?" My anatomical plates were lying open before me, and without allowing me time to answer him, he began to discuss upon the work. He regretted it had not been executed sooner. He would have applied to anatomy. He would know it, and that would be an additional satisfaction to him. He had often tried to study it, but disgust had overcome his wish to learn. He had never been able to conquer the sort of horror with which the sight of a corpse inspired him. These plates rendered dissection, as it were, useless. A single glance enabled one to discover the play and structure of the various organs, to observe their relation to one another, to trace their ramifications. The human frame was laid open and published. He was sorry the execution of the plan had been so long delayed. "Doctor, your plates form a magnificent work. I wish them to be dedicated to me, to appear under my auspices. I'm anxious to render this last service to science. I will supply you with the money, and you shall return to Europe and publish them. I feel ambition to contribute, to raise this monument." The emperor often returned to this subject and spoke each time with renewed satisfaction of the undertaking. "But why have you not drawn a line of demarcation to point out your share of the work and distinguish it from that of Mascagni? Every man should enjoy the merit of the result of his own researches. You have framed the introduction to the work, you have written the text of the anatomy of painters, and you published the whole in the name of the professor. This is sacrificing too much and acting too disinterested, too modest a part. Everyone must have his own." "True, sire, but my share is naturally pointed out in the work itself. Mascagni has engraved 30 plates and given an account of his discoveries. What remains over and above that is mine. Let a comparison be made. I only claim the difference." The progress of the emperor's complaint was slow, but unceasing and visible. It was particularly on the mind that its effect was marked. Napoleon now only spoke of the objects that had arrested his attention during his infancy, and of his friends and relations. The news that had been circulating respecting his son had grieved him beyond measure. He complained and bewailed the fate of that child, whose cradle had been surrounded by so many hopes. At last he heard that he had been named a corporal. "I breathe," said he, and then, as if unwilling to betray his emotion, he began to speak of Corsica and of the recollections he had preserved of that country. "When I visited Genoa after my accession to the throne of Italy, I thought myself suddenly transported to our mountains. Shape, manners, dress, arrangement of the shops, everything was like our country. This similarity struck me, and Josephine enjoyed my astonishment and endeavored to prolong its duration." "What? The features and habits are the same?" "Yes, probably the Corsicans are the bastards of the Genoese." This idea made her laugh and amused her very much. I went out on horseback, rode over the heights, and visited the positions which defended Genoa, and fixed the works to be made to protect the town. I could not help admiring this odd fancy of nature, in having, as it were, carved the two countries after the same model. I had been 3 hours rambling over these rugged places. It was 11 o'clock, and I was exhausted. I returned and set to work with the worthy Godin, who presented me the plan of the financial organization of the Liguria. I was completely overcome with fatigue, and he had hardly begun to read before I was asleep. I begged him to desist for a short time, whilst I went to take a few minutes' rest, but I met in my passage some generals who awaited my orders. I dispatched their business and remained 36 hours at work, and it was only at my departure that I could sign the minister's plan. This Duke of Gaeta was a man full of zeal and of the greatest probity. What services he has rendered! The emperor briefly capitulated the share he had in our successes by his financial operations, and added, "A short time after the Battle of Austerlitz, he came and asked me for my cannons of bronze. 'How,' said I, 'do you wish to wage war against me?' 'No, sire, only wish to make coining dies of them. My cannons for such a purpose use something else. But I intended that the words dies of Austerlitz should be engraved on every one.' 'Minister, you assail my vanity. Well, be it so. I give them to you.' We had now got to the end of the first fortnight in September. The pain of the liver returned and became more acute, and the emperor experienced disgust and nausea, followed by vomiting and sensations of violent heat in the right hypochondriac and epigastric regions. Walking in open air, be the weather what it might be, either hot or cold, calm or boisterous, became intolerable to him. He felt exhausted and was obliged to seek rest. 18th. Eyes sunk, conjunctiva of a yellow cast, lips and gums discovered, tongue covered with a whitish substance, skin excessively pale, bordering upon yellow, complexion tinged with a greenish cast, pain in the head, particularly about the forehead and the eyebrows, nightmare, incubus, uneasy sensation of the heat in the thorax, breathing difficult, interrupted by deep sighs, feet and legs icy cold, warmth restored to them by the application of warm linen, skin dry and burning, pulse low and quick. 80. The epigastric region, painful on pressure. The emperor experienced a sensation of heaviness in the abdomen. I endeavored to rouse him from the state of lethargy by speaking of the care his health required. 'Doctor, forbear,' said he. 'We are happy when we sleep. Wants, privations, cares, and anxiety are then no more.' He fell again upon his pillow. He had a violent headache, and after many entreaties I succeeded in making him consent to take a purgative, which afforded great relief.